farmers, and the ACT Party, Mr Speaker, supports this bill.
The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I did agree with some of the comments from John Banks, but it didn't escape me that he accused others of gratuitous abuse and then proceeded to do exactly that to every party in the opposition. And, Mr Speaker, I don't think that reflected very well on the rest of your speech, Mr Banks, and it was unnecessary. I do agree with you that it is important that we have a competitive milk price, that the split in the total return that a Fonterra co-op member has between milk and their profit from their shares in Fonterra is an appropriate split. I also agree with the Honourable John Banks that it is a highly technical area. And the members of the Labour Party, as I'm sure the members of the ACT Party and other parties, have received submissions from some of the competitors who are wishing to purchase milk, who have a view that the price-setting mechanism in this bill is not right. And I have to say that I was initially convinced somewhat by some of those assertions that the milk price was being set at too high a price, being based on a theoretical model for the price of milk, driven by a theoretical profitable business based on new investment which goes into primarily milk powder rather than some of the older assets relating to the production of cheese, which are less profitable. I was eventually convinced by Fonterra, and from submissions that we received at Select, or not I, but the Select Committee received from officials advising the Select Committee, that in fact the profitable parts of the Fonterra business and the profitable parts of competitors to Fonterra are generally driven these days by a milk price model that relates to milk powder, and that therefore the fundamental building blocks of this price model that Fonterra are using, which is based on a milk powder model, is correct. So in respect of that part of the bill, I've got to the point where I think it is appropriate. I think that there are proper concerns raised by the smaller competitors that they not pay too high a price for milk, because obviously if they have to pay too high a price for milk, an uncompetitive price, they can't operate. And I agree with Mr Banks that it is in those small operators that we do see innovative practice being developed, including niche markets and overseas, and that competition at that part of the market is important to the long-term health of the Fonterra cooperative, which is what we're trying to grapple with in this piece of legislation. But the part of the jigsaw that is, for me, is wrong in respect of this legislation is the absence of a statutory cap in the legislation restricting the proportion of the co-op shares that can be put on this trading platform, so that the farmer doesn't own the returns from those shares. The farmer would still get a price for the milk that they deliver, but they don't get the share of profits from those shares that they put on this trading platform. Now, we've had to endure the insults from Mr Banks, who asserts that in the opposition we've got no understanding of commerce. Mr Banks, it was you that tripled council debt when you were last Mayor of Auckland. It wasn't this.
The member does not use you like that. He's perfectly entitled to debate the issue, but he does not.
It was Mr Banks who tripled council debt when he was last Mayor, and we don't accept lessons in fiscal responsibility or economic management from Mr Banks. Mr Speaker, the trading amongst farmers is driven by the concern amongst Fonterra that their capital base could be at risk of people redeeming their shares in the co-op in a way that creates effectively a run on the finances of Fonterra. There are a number of points to be made about that. One is the worst almost imaginable combination of events did occur a few years ago. We had the global financial crisis coinciding with a drought. Farmers were pressed on their balance sheets. They were further pressed by banks, because those, not Mr Banks, by New Zealand banks, because those banks themselves were suffering liquidity constraints, and they put the squeeze on a number of farmers to whom they had extended credit. And so there were a number of farmers who were saying we want to withdraw some of our capital tied up in Fonterra. And in addition to that, we had the prior period of boom time when Fonterra had not been making any retentions from their profits by way of retained earnings to improve Fonterra's balance sheet. Despite that almost perfect storm to the detriment of Fonterra, Fonterra did get through. So I think some of the concerns about redemption risk have been overstated. Nonetheless, there is a germ of truth there that Fonterra are appropriately trying to guard against. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party has been a long-term supporter of the structures under which the dairy industry in New Zealand has thrived. It was the Labour Party under Michael Joseph Savage that created the first form of the Dairy Board, which brought this collective strength of all of the farmers together and caused the development of this vertically integrated industry, which ensures that an appropriate share of the total profit to be made from the farm right through to the retail consumer is captured for the benefit of the New Zealand farm and the New Zealand economy. It was the Labour government under Helen Clark and Michael Cullen that then forced through legislation with the support of the National Party, which overrode local competition concerns to the detriment of New Zealand consumers, probably in respect of the New Zealand retail or the New Zealand milk consumption market. We overrode the Commerce Act, which would otherwise have stopped the merger of New Zealand Dairy Group and Kiwi Dairy Cooperative because of their dominance in the New Zealand milk market. And, I beg your pardon? There were conditions relating to divestment, as Mr. Ardern suggests, but this Parliament overrode New Zealand's Commerce Act in order to bring Fonterra into being. We did that because we thought that there was a New Zealand interest which exceeds the domestic competition concerns. And since then, under this vertically integrated model, the interests of Fonterra and the farmers who own Fonterra and the country who benefits from Fonterra have improved, as that has been a very successful model. And the germ of that remains to be true, that we want a vertically integrated industry. Now, to the extent that you can have different holders of share capital or different holders of interests in Fonterra who have different interests, you set up a tension. And I think everyone agrees that that tension is created by this legislation, that there will be some people who in the future are not farmers who have a long-term interest in the vertical integration of that industry from farm gate through to retail in China or wherever those branded products are going to be sold in the future. There could be a tension between the interests of those long-term farmers and the interests of the New Zealand economy, which coincide with the interests of those farmers, and the interests of people who buy the profit stream from some of these shares through TAF, through trading amongst farmers. And it's that point that we in this Parliament need to be very careful about, because as Mr Banks and the Minister have previously said, this has become New Zealand's most important export industry. A full quarter of New Zealand's exports come from the dairy sector, and just about all of them come from Fonterra. So, Mr Speaker, we should be taking care that we don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And it's for that reason that the Labour Party has said that there ought to be a statutory limit in this legislation as to the proportion of the total shares in Fonterra that can be traded and separated from the farmer who provides the milk. And we have said that that limit should be 20%. Fonterra came back, and our reason for that was that there have been overseas examples relating to Kerry Dairy in Ireland, where at 20% the long-term seeds of destruction of the cooperative model have been sown. And so we thought, well, 20% is probably an appropriate limit. Fonterra came back to us and they engaged with us very maturely with the expertise that you would expect from Fonterra and their professionalism, and we thank them for that. And they came back and they said, look, 20% we can't live with, but 23% we can. 23% is above where we intend to go. And indeed, they want to have a limit in their own constitution to similar effect of around 20%. I might have that percentage wrong, but they want a limit in their constitution. But they were willing to agree to an amendment through this Parliament which had a statutory limit and said if you want to go beyond that, you've actually got to think from the point of view of Parliament about whether you are sowing the seeds of destruction in the cooperative. The National Party would not agree to the amendment. Therefore, we're opposing this legislation because it was without the statutory protection of a statutory limit. Thank you.
Stephen Browning.